Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Malcolm Renfrew Interdisciplinary Colloquium. It's Tuesday, March 23rd. As we begin the second half of our semester, we've got a great lineup coming up the rest of this semester. I'm Kenton Bird. I'm the co-coordinator of this series with my colleague Dan Buckovich from the Lionel Hampton School of Music, and this is actually the 40th semester, if you can believe it. The colloquium began in the fall of 2001, so this is the 20th year, and we'll be talking about ways we're going to celebrate that 20th anniversary in the fall. Before introducing today's speaker, let me tell you just a little bit about what is to come in this colloquium series. So next Tuesday, March the 30th, we welcome Elizabeth Cullen Dunn, a professor of geography at Indiana University, Bloomington. She is the 2021 Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholar, and she's making a virtual visit to our campus for 3 days next week, speaking to classes and giving a public lecture, and she graciously agreed to parachute into the Renfrew Colloquium on Tuesday. Her topic is refugees and racial capitalism, what integration in the labor market really means. And we'll have the abstract of her talk and the bio sent out on Thursday of this week. I think it's something that many regular attendees of the colloquium and your students will find of interest. I'm also putting the first call out now for proposals for fall of 2021 and beyond. We're inviting nominations and self-nominations from faculty, emeriti, postdocs, graduate and undergraduate students. And we're especially interested in hearing from interdisciplinary teams or from individual scholars who use interdisciplinary methods in their creative activities, scholarship, teaching, or outreach activities. So just giving you the early call that we'll start screening those proposals on the 16th of April, and watch for more details as we move closer to that date. Today, our guest is Ben Hunter, the Dean of Libraries at the University of Idaho. We're delighted to have Ben, and as I see on the screen, many of the faculty and staff from the library joining us today for an insight into this important topic of scholarly communication, why we're losing access to our own research, and what we can do about it. And so I'm hoping that our audience will be prepared to engage at the end of the hour with questions, comments, and observations. And I'll turn it over to Professor Hunter to begin today's presentation.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Kenton. So happy to be here. I've worked at the University of Idaho since 2006 and never done one of these colloquiums. So I'm excited to finally get on the agenda. Thanks to everyone for coming out. I know that scholarly communication and economics, that's not really catnip for an audience. It's not the punchiest title. I probably could have done better. But the topic really is very fascinating. Of course, I think so. And I hope if you don't already think so, that by the end of this presentation, you kind of see it, because it really affects all of us. It affects us, those of us who are faculty and staff at universities, those of us who have students at universities, those of us who are just members of the general public who benefit from scholarly communication and the results of that system. It's a public good. So we'll be talking about that today, giving a little bit of context to some of the big news you might see around this, Elsevier cancellations, other big packages, and to let you know, for those of you here at the university, why you have a lot less access than you did 2 years ago to journals. Now, a couple of caveats before I get started. I'm not an economist, I'm a librarian. So this is kind of a lowercase e economics If there are any economists in the audience today, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the Q&A or afterward. But I'll be taking a more descriptive, practical sort of approach, not a theoretical one. And I'll be talking primarily about academic journals and monographs to a lesser extent today. I won't be talking about creative activities. That's not to dismiss their importance. That's not to say that gallery shows, performances, recordings aren't a really important part of the scholarly communication system and something with their own economic considerations that surround them. But just in the interest of time and trying to keep the material somewhat manageable, I won't be talking about those. And before I jump into today's PowerPoint, what I'd like to do is spend just a few minutes establishing what we really mean by the phrase scholarly communication. So basically, it's just how scholarship and research is communicated. It really is that simple. In a little more detail, it's how scholarship and research is created, how it's evaluated for quality, how it's disseminated to the scholarly community, and how it's preserved for future use. So creation, evaluation, dissemination, preservation. And today we'll mostly be talking about sort of formal means of scholarly communication, scholarly monographs, peer-reviewed journals, but that's not to discount that scholarly communication also includes a lot of informal means like listservs, emails, message boards, etc., but not really the topic of today's conversation. As a side note, I'd like to say that this is what academic libraries are really all about. It's scholarly communication. It's buying books, licensing journals, telling people helping people use those. That's part of our mission because we are about scholarly communication in libraries. So that's why I'm here today talking to you about scholarly communication. A few other things about that. About scholarly communication, it is created for the public good. A large portion of it is created using public funds, so federal grant money or money from research institutions, publicly funded research institutions. Authors rarely receive direct financial rewards. Now, this is certainly not news to the faculty members on the call, but for others who may not be as intimately familiar with the system, for example, if you are a professor of biology and you write just a fantastic study, you write it up in a paper, you submit it to a top tier journal, makes a huge impact, hundreds, thousands of people read it, you still don't get any money for that. That's a really important part of the system. Remember, is that authors don't get compensated in the way we normally think about authors getting compensated. And one last kind of big point I want to make, which is a little bit of a digression, but I think it is very, very important to our conversation today. And that is that our current system is still designed around print. Now, the internet's been around for 30 years or so, right? It's very much embedded in our lives. There are probably people on the call who have never been alive in a time when the internet wasn't really prevalent. But even 30 years into this, our scholarly communication system still revolves primarily around academic books, scholarly books, and peer-reviewed journals. Now, if we were to create the system from scratch in a digital environment, the idea of having a journal with a title that has volumes that consist of issues that may have articles that are loosely collected by by subject, but not necessarily theme, that doesn't make a lot of sense in a digital environment. It makes a ton of sense in a print environment when that was the most efficient way to distribute this content, not so much in a digital environment. So there are a lot of reasons why this model has been so sticky. Some of it is because this model has some real advantages by still keeping publication centered around big publishers. You see the name Wiley or Elsevier or Nature or Springer on a journal, it's going to be a legitimate source in a way that stuff on the internet just necessarily, it might require a lot more detective work to figure it out. We're very used to the system, so that's important. And The nature of print objects, which we've emulated in the digital environment, being fixed objects, right? It's really hard to go into a book and change the text, especially for something that's been distributed, but it's almost harder not to change something online. So the way our research and scholarship works, where we cite previous research and scholarship, it's very important that we be able to refer back to previous objects. So there's some real advantages to it. I do also want to note, and this is a very important point when it comes to the economics around scholarly communication, what we own and what we don't own, is that when you buy a physical object, you own that object. You have something called the right of first sale. So the University of Idaho Library bought this book, and now if we take good care of this book, we could have this book 200 years in the future, right? That's our right. We don't have to pay the publisher any extra to have it next year or the next year, or to just keep it forever. We can lend this book to anybody we want to lend this book to. We can send it to another library on the other side of the world, and they can lend it to one of their users. We can sell this book. We can't, mechanically reproduce it and sell it. That's a copyright issue, but basically we own this object. We can do what we want with it. This same book, if we own an ebook copy of it, we don't own that. We license that book, and that we are beholden to the terms of the contract. If the publisher that provided that book or the provider goes out of business, we can just lose access to that book altogether. There might be stuff in that contract that says, might be language in that contract that says we're not allowed to share the book in certain ways or with certain people. It's a way of doing, there's kind of an end run around copyright law and all the protections that affords. So even though the digital environment may emulate the print environment in a lot of ways, there are a lot of things about that, especially the not owning content, that really advantage the publishers and the providers over the libraries and the universities, people who purchase the content. Okay, having established that, I'd like to jump into the discussion of the economics. I assume that everybody can see this just fine. If you can't, just wave your hands around. Okay, looks good. All right, so again, I'm not an economist, so we'll take a slightly more informal sort of approach to this, and I'll just say who pays who for what and how. So I'll talk about kind of three main topics today: scholarly monographs, otherwise known as books, textbooks, and the main event, journals. If you don't know why journals are the main event, stick around, you'll find out. And then we'll talk about some strategies that we can use to start to change the system, that we are using to start to transform the system, I should say. So scholarly monographs, books, their value is twofold. The scholarly monograph is a cornerstone of many humanities fields, many social sciences fields. This is the most important, or one of the most important, if not the most important way that scholarship and research is produced and disseminated in these fields. So that's a value that we're all pretty aware of. But there's also a second value to universities that's often kind of under the radar, and that is credentialing. So most universities, many colleges in these humanities and social sciences departments, you are strongly encouraged, if not expected, to publish a scholarly book in order to get tenure and promotion. And now, for those on the call who aren't familiar with the tenure and promotion system, just a quick, simple overview: you get hired into a tenure track professor position, you're an assistant professor, and you have essentially 6 years to show that you are a productive researcher and scholar, that you're a good member of the university community, all of that. And during those 6 years, a lot of fields expect that you will produce a full-length academic book and get it published. And then of course, if you get denied tenure and promotion at the end of those 6 years, you're out of a job. So the stakes are pretty high here. And that credentialing function is a very, very important part of the scholarly monograph. Now, despite that real value to universities, sales have fallen significantly since the 1970s. In the 1970s, scholarly publishers usually could expect that they could sell 1,500 copies of any given book. Now that's down to 200 to 500. So a lot of reasons for that. One is that there are more books on the market, but kind of the big reason is that academic libraries do the vast majority of that purchasing. And academic libraries' budgets, although they've risen quite a bit since the 1970s, much more of that budget is now going to journals, specifically journals in the STEM field: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So we'll get into that a little bit, but those journal budgets have really cannibalized a lot of the monograph budget. And in some ways, we've allowed that to happen in libraries because from a purely sort of return on investment standpoint, scholarly books are often an underperforming asset in that, a scholarly book usually costs about $100. And in any given academic library, you can generally expect one of these books to get checked out on average once in the first 2 years we own it. So just using that kind of like arithmetic, spreadsheet, sort of, have to make hard decisions on a budget kind of standpoint, books are often the thing that suffers at the expense of journals. So this has created an environment where scholarly presses have been closing more and more, and we're left with fewer than 100 scholarly presses serving around 1,500 colleges and universities just in this country. And again, remember, this is not just fundamental to distributing the research and scholarship of certain fields, but it's also this important credentialing function that universities, ours included, rely on. And so University of Idaho used to have a press. We closed it 20 years ago, maybe more, maybe a little less, I'm not sure. But we don't have a press anymore, and we buy far fewer books than we used to. So we are in the same position of a lot of universities in that we're free writing a little bit in this system. We were relying on these other universities that are subsidizing their university presses. About 75% are subsidized by their host institutions. And that value isn't always recognized. So that's where we are with scholarly monographs. Now, textbooks, very different than scholarly books when you're looking, well, for a lot of reasons, but certainly from an economic aspect viewpoint. And one of the big ones is big money, right? And make of it what you will, but a lot of times when there's big money, that profit center is somewhere in the private sector. If there's not a lot of money to be made, like academic monographs, we do that in the universities. So lots of money in scholarly books. Your average college student will spend on average $1,200 per year on textbooks now. So a lot of money changing hands. Price of textbooks has gone up a lot. Government Accountability Office reports a 82% increase from 2002 to 2012. That's compared to a 28% increase in the Consumer Price Index over the same time. And then, of course, I think any of us who are professors, instructors, certainly students, know how publishers do a lot to prevent reselling books, right? I think the thing we're most familiar with is the new edition. So you've got a calculus textbook, and calculus is not a quickly moving field. It's not that there's a lot that you have to get into an entry-level textbook that's been discovered in the past 2 years, right? But publishers still keep putting out new editions over and over and over, add some new colors, some new formatting, very importantly, change the page numbers so that the resale value of those books goes down and more students are forced to buy the new edition where the money goes to the publisher. Get to that in a second. Another thing that I think we're increasingly familiar with is the idea of bundling content, where you buy the print book and you're a student, you own that print book, you have the right of first sale and you can do what you want with it and you can resell it, but it comes with a code in there and you only get to use that code once, and that gets you access to the online material, the supplementary material that your instructor might require you to use for the class. So this is a big problem. It's a big problem from the standpoint of student affordability. It makes it that much harder for students to afford college, and it makes it that much harder for students to be successful in college because, boy, if something's going to give, you're either going to eat or you're going to buy a textbook. Most students are going to eat and try and make do without that textbook. And, studies have shown the obvious. If you don't have a textbook, you don't do as well in a class. And this would seem to be a natural place for libraries to come in, but it's a difficult space for us to be in because that $200 calculus textbook that's going to be out of date next year or the year after is not a great investment from our point of view, because that book is pretty much useless once people on our campus are no longer using it. That's true for the vast majority of textbooks. And if it's essentially a one-time use, then we have to get rid of it. We don't want it taking up room on our shelves. It eats into our already stretched monograph budget. So it's a difficult position. Our library has taken a more liberal stand on purchasing textbooks to make available to students for the student affordability reasons, but it's tough, and it cuts into those scholarly monographs that we buy. Okay, we've done scholarly monographs, we talked about textbooks. Now, as I said, the main event, journals. And this graph right here is why journals are the main event when we talk about the economics of scholarly communication. Now, this is a snapshot of the fiscal year 18 U of I library budget. I'm using fiscal year 18 because it's before we had this big budget reduction and we had to cancel a lot of packages. So I think it's a little more useful for the purposes of our conversation. But this pie chart right here is just our UI library resource budget for fiscal year 2018. And this represents 55% of the overall library budget. So the journals and databases slice of this pie, you can see right here. Electronic resources, we're not buying these, we're licensing them. 90% of that portion of our budget, 90% of 55% of our budget, it's about half of our entire library budget. $3.74 million and change is going just to journals and databases. And that's a big number. And a very important thing to remember about that number is that the inflation on those journals and databases, on those electronic resources, average between 5 and 6% per year. So that $3.7 million in FY19 suddenly becomes $3.7 million plus 5%. So a lot of money going to the journal, going to our journals. Here's a a grossly oversimplified model of how the money and the content flow. Apologies for my graphic design skills or lack thereof here. But basically you have the universities, they create the content, right? We do the research, we do the scholarship, we write the articles, and we send them to the publishers, content providers. And then they sell that content back to us via libraries. And then we make that available to our universities. The way the money flows, the universities fund their libraries, they give us an allocation. The academic libraries then work with the campus to identify where to spend the resource budget. So that's sort of the flow of content and money. And what it results in is something that we call the triple pay system. So universities produce content, right? We do the research and scholarship and we write it up, and then we upload it to a privately owned publisher's platform in most cases to be reviewed. Then that platform bounces it back to other university faculty, other researchers and scholars who review that content and decide, does it need revisions? Is it okay how it is? They get everything squared away, send the chosen articles off to the publishers for editing. Publishers typically do a relatively small amount of editing on these articles, mostly for style and formatting, put them on their platform, and then they send them back to us, and we purchase and license content, and then they do the hosting. So universities produce the content, we review the content, and we purchase and license the content. So it's a pretty great deal for the publishers. And one of the big publishers out there that I think many of us have heard of, Elsevier, their profit margins are in the mid 30%. And now, again, I'm not an economist. I don't have a lot to compare that to, but I do know that that's higher than Apple. That's higher than Google. It's, by most accounts, a pretty obscene profit margin. Pretty great for them. So they're providing us a service, but they're clearly making a lot of money off of it. So there's a lot of detail to go into here. I think what might be most useful right now is to talk about a big deal at the University of Idaho. And if you haven't heard of a big deal, what that means will become clear in just a minute. So first of all, we go back to the 1990s, and second floor of the University of Idaho Library looked very different than it does now. You know, big long bookshelves filled with, you know, print journals, and they'd be alphabetical by title, and they'd stack up and eventually get a whole issue or a volume, and we'd send them off to the binder, and they would package them into this, and we put that out by call number, and that's basically how it worked. We kept statistics on those journals. You know, if they didn't get used at all, we might cancel them, but might bring some new ones on, but generally it was relatively stable. And in the 90s, publishers started getting into electronic access, and we started getting that kind of tacked on as an added bonus. More and more people had internet connections and computers, and it's, you know, didn't take long for that to catch on because it's very, very convenient. And after a while, the publisher came to us and they said, look, you buy, you buy 400 or whatever number of our journals. Your big invoice that comes every year looks like this. This is your big price for all these journals. And how about we do this? How about we take that and we say that that is your base collection. So we'll just kind of like take that price, we'll bundle them all together, and you'll keep getting access to these journals, and we'll kind of lock that in. And the reason why that's a great deal is because this other thing we can do, and for a not inconsequential fee, but a really, you know, pretty great price given what we're going to receive, you get access to everything else we publish, basically. Pretty much all the content online. We're not going to send you the print copies. You don't get perpetual access rights to the electronic for that collection, but you get access to pretty much everything we have. And I mean, that is an offer that you can't refuse as a librarian. Like, for a little more cost, you can suddenly have a research journal collection from that publisher that rivals any of the biggest academic libraries in the country. Pretty fantastic deal we can't refuse. And built into that deal is inflation. So, you know, publishers say we're continually bringing out new content, improving our platform. It just gets better and better and better. So extra 4 or 5%, 6% per year. We'll build that into a contract, sign a multi-year contract. We'll keep that a little lower than usual. So, okay, again, how can we say no to that? And so now we have a big deal. That's what a big deal is. All that, everything all packaged up into one big, huge price tag. We get all the content. Now the price is a secret, and this is really interesting and kind of galling, really. But you know, the contract says we can't share the pricing information. We don't know what Washington State pays for theirs. We don't know what Boise State's paying. We don't know what University of Montana is paying. But that's okay because it seems like we're getting a good value for what we're getting. Now there has been, this would be a fun digression to go, don't have time to get into it. There have been some authors who have done Freedom of Information Act requests and gotten this pricing information from universities. And like, once we're compelled to that degree, then we have to give it up, and they publish these prices. And we can see that we were actually paying, you know, 30, 40% more than some universities that were very similarly sized, very, you know, very much peer institutions to us. And the reason for that is just that our base package happened to be bigger. We were buying more for them, so they got bundled together into something bigger. And of course, so we're locked into this, and full access becomes an expectation, right? How could it not? This is so wonderful, so convenient, and we had this for 20 years or more. But that inflation keeps piling up, and it becomes unsustainable, right? Eventually, we're not getting 5 to 6% more on our library budget each year, certainly not. And so we start buying less books. We start, we hire fewer positions. We maybe cancel some of those smaller resources that, we can probably do without because we need this big package. But eventually, everything kind of breaks. And for us, it kind of broke in right after fiscal year 18 when we had the university-wide budget drawdowns and inflation kind of hit this unsustainable hit. It was just perfect storm of just awful budget news for us. Coincidentally, the year I came in as dean, so that was bad timing on my part. But we have no way to negotiate, right? We went to the publisher and said, we can't pay this anymore. Like, unless we lay off half of our people, which we can't do, we can't pay this anymore. And, they kind of, went and talked to their manager, did the used car dealer thing, and they come back and, well, they offered us, lower annual inflation for a little while if we keep on. And like, no, we just can't pay this. And so we had to drop that big deal. And that was that. We lost a huge amount of content that people had been used to having access to for decades at this point. And we can't shop around because they have a monopoly. Like, we want access to the Journal of Fluorine Chemistry. We can't go to 3 different places. We can't see if Walmart gives a better price than Amazon on this, and or negotiate that way. It's just like, they've got a price, they're giving it to us. We don't know what our price compares to any other university in the country, but if we don't pay it, we don't get it. So this is not what happened, but just as a little bit of a illustration of, I think, what is starting to become a little bit obvious. This takes our fiscal year 18 budget, what we paid for journals and databases, what we paid for everything else. This is, the people we hire, our library catalog, the different resource sharing consortiums we're part of, everything else the library does is in the everything else, the books we buy. And so that gives our total budget of $7.1 million. And we'll just pretend that budget stayed stable, which it absolutely has not, but say that budget stayed stable. And let's say in fiscal year 18, we said, we are committed to keeping access to everything we always had access to. And we're going to hold the line. Factor in 6% inflation. You go down this chart and you see we go from, $3.3, $3.4 million for all of our people, for all of our other platforms, for our catalog, for our books, for everything, for our special collections. Well, we keep paying 6%. We've got less than $500,000 left at the end of the year. Like, I don't know what that gets us. That gets us a couple people to work on licensing for those journals and some people to open up the doors, a few times a week to let people in to look at our book collections. So not sustainable, obviously. And we're not alone in this. No other university is giving their library 5 to 6% per year. And so these are just the Elsevier big deal cancellations since 2019. So University of Idaho on here, and we're in good company, right? State University of New York system, UC system, Virginia Tech, University of Virginia, MIT, New Mexico State. You can see these are big universities. These are R1 universities, and they're suffering in the same way we are. So this brings us to what can we do about it? How can we work against this system that is so entrenched that is centered on profit eventually? How do we make it more about quality, access, and preservation for the results of our scholarly communication, again, which is a public good? This is something that authors are not getting rich off of. It's not something that universities are getting rich off of. This is something that benefits all universities, all researchers, all countries, throughout the world. And so much of it is locked behind paywalls right now. So kind of the big strategy, big headline strategy is working toward our open access. Now this orange thing off to the side, if you haven't seen this is the open access logo. It's sort of a stylized unlocked padlock, because we've unlocked access to the content. And it's pretty simple. It's basically just aims to make the products of scholarship and research available freely online to the public rather than locked behind paywalls. Seems pretty simple. Of course, it's much more complicated than that. Couple definitions I'll throw out in case you've heard these before or hear them in the future. Gold open access is one of the kind of the two big flavors of open access, and that's when you actually publish in an open access publication. So if a journal is entirely free to read online, they don't charge subscriptions, you can just go online and read it, and you publish in there, that's gold open access. Green open access is when authors make their work directly available. So for example, if you are maybe publishing with a journal that is all locked behind a paywall, it requires paid access, but you as an author read your contract carefully and make sure, or if it's not in there, ask to retain some of the rights to your own work, then you can have rights to have your article and put it on your website, put a preprint of your article, so one that's not formatted by the publisher, on your webpage, on your university's institutional repository. That's an example of green open access. And gold open access, now open access is free to the people who use it, but open access is not free, right? Someone has to pay for what happens. The publishers do provide a service for us. I don't want to totally dismiss what they do offer for us. They don't necessarily have to make a 35% profit margin on providing that to us, but they do provide a very important service. And publishing takes money, it takes people, it takes infrastructure, and article processing charges are a way to fund open access journals. And what this is when authors pay money to a publication when they have their article submitted to make it available to the world. So I want to emphasize, this isn't vanity publishing. This isn't your your uncle's book that no publisher wanted to publish, and then he contacted a firm and had it bound up and sold and gave some to his family and friends. That's it's an entirely different thing. Legitimate open access publishing with the article processing charges is the same peer review process, the same quality as a normal journal. It's just that economic equation is reversed, where the costs of publishing are paid upfront by the author, by the institution, by the granting agency, instead of then by the readers. There are a couple different models within this. One is the full open access journal. Again, that idea of a journal that is entirely free to anybody online. The other is a hybrid open access journal. And there are more and more of these out there. I suspect that most journals will probably be hybrid open access before too long. And that's when you do the normal thing as a scholar, researcher, author. You write your article, you send it off to the publisher, it goes through the peer review process, they accept it, and then they say, if you want your article to be open access, you can pay an article processing charge. So these aren't cheap. These average around $1,500 a piece. So, but that's a way to make an individual article as part of a paid journal open access. Now, a lot of these strategies that we're talking about, there's no one big answer. Like there's not this amazing new world of scholarly publishing and we just need to stop doing what we're doing and go do this new one. What we need to do is gradually transition the system. We need to have a diversity of methods that we use to get to a more just system of scholarly communication. And one of the ways that the U of I supports this is we have an open access publishing fund. Probably some of the faculty on here may have heard of this or even used it. And that is a partnership between the library, the Office of the Provost, and the Research Office to make money available to authors who apply and are publishing in open access journals to fund those article processing charges, to start to move some of our money away from paying to access journals and instead paying to make the content we publish fully open access. Now, related to this is the idea of transformative agreements. Now, I wasn't going to go into transformative agreements. It's a little bit in the weeds, but it's in the news right now. And I'll say, so transformative agreements is one thing to call them. They're also called read and publish. They're also called publish and read agreements. There's a little bit of difference between those two. Won't go into that today. But that new University of California system and Elsevier agreement that was announced a couple of weeks ago, it's a transformative agreement. Now, some of you are probably aware back in 2019, Elsevier kind of famously, or University of California system kind of famously canceled their Elsevier subscription. They said, we can't negotiate with these people. We're done. We're out. This new UC Elsevier agreement now restores access, and it does so as a transformative agreement. And what that means is that contract, the bottom line is pretty much the same as what it was before, but instead of the institution paying for access to read the content, they're paying upfront for open access publishing charges. So in theory, this is a really great thing, right? University of California system produces a ton of content. All of that is going to be open access now, probably in almost entirely in hybrid open access journals. But while it does create a lot more open access content, it also does preserve the publisher's bottom line. So there's a lot of, there are those who criticize these agreements as being just a way to drum up some really good press for the publishers and continue getting those big contracts while, yes, transitioning slowly to an open access system, but doing so slowly and in a way that is probably not going to make any real significant effect on the overall bottom line in the near future. I know we're getting a little short on time, so I'll try and speed through these last couple of slides, but I do want to mention that just hosting our own content, the internet is of course an amazing distribution tool. This is another very important tool for us to diversify our information ecosystem. And we have some really robust digital scholarship programs at the University of Idaho Library, working in the digital scholarship, digital humanities. Our Center for Digital Inquiry and Learning partners with CLASS to create some pretty amazing scholarship that is not traditional articles, not traditional monographs, but really is original research that really has some pretty profound impacts. Institutional repositories, I'll just mention this is a strategy that a lot of universities use where they make a big server available where people can put those preprints, or they can put data sets, where that green open access can happen. Many universities, many libraries host open access journals. The University of Idaho Library has hosted a number of journals over the years, going back actually to the late 90s. We were one of the first institutions to do this. And there's some really great collaborative efforts out there. I've listed a couple here underneath that are more aimed at the scholarly monograph, scholarly book system. Both these are efforts that the University of Idaho Library has been part of. We recently joined the Lever Press, which is a consortium of libraries that all pay together to fund a very high quality open access scholarly press for monographs. We're just signing the contracts for that now, so we'll probably be putting out some press releases. The Knowledge Unlatched program is another very interesting model where libraries pool money together to actually buy outright from publishers the rights to books and then make those books open access. Moving over to the textbooks, open educational resources. This is something that you're hearing a lot about in the higher education news, and I know that the Idaho State Board of Education is very interested in these. And this just basically encourages instructors to make open access and freely available material the textbooks for a course. And there's some very high quality textbooks and resources out there that people can use to replace some of those very high cost books. They're free online for a relatively small charge. You can get a printed copy if you prefer print. And I should acknowledge that for an instructor to transition fully to all open access, it's no small thing to ask of a faculty member to redo a whole course around a new textbook or around new materials. So one thing the library is doing is we have what we call the Think Open Fellowships that provide some funding and a lot of support to instructors who are creating new textbooks or reusing existing materials to make their classes free. And this program has saved, over the few years that we've had it up, hundreds of thousands of dollars in textbook costs for students. Last slide. Okay, what can we do? What can we do as individuals? What can we do as faculty members? What can we do as students? What can we do as citizens? Well, for those of us who publish, prioritize open access platforms, publications, when you're submitting the article, when you're shopping around for a publisher for your book manuscript. Now, these open access journals, publishers are almost, they're generally less well established. They haven't been around for as long. Yet open access material, not surprisingly, tends to get cited by other researchers more because it's easier to find, easier to get to. But should be noted that a lot of times these open access publications, either because they're newer or some people just think that have some misconceptions about open access, in promotion and tenure decisions, sometimes these are seen as less than other publications. That's something in our culture that we need to change. That's something in our promotion and tenure processes that we have real control over, and where we can make a decision that, okay, this journal, maybe the impact factor isn't quite as high as the journal that we can't pay to see anymore, but the overall impact is going to be greater and it contributes to the greater good. Maybe a controversial statement, but make preprints available when possible. You do want to publish with that journal. Just read your contract, talk to your librarian, make sure you have rights to still post the preprint of your article online, so that even if the final copy is locked behind a paywall, people can still get to your research. Allowing for greater diversity of modes of scholarship and promotion and tenure processes. Again, think back to this idea that our scholarly communication system is a pretend print system. It's still, although it's digital, it has all the capabilities of multimedia and interactive everything. We're still, by and large, I mean, not entirely, I don't want to make overly broad statement there, but by and large, still emulates the print world, allowing for new modes of digital scholarship, open science. There are a lot of ways that those promotion and tenure processes can be changed to acknowledge different ways of seeing value. Instructors, lecturers, I know this is a big ask sometimes, but when you can, use open educational resources. And lecturers, instructors, teaching faculty members, I apologize in advance, but I'm going to say to the students in the audience, talk to your professor, ask them to use OERs when possible. We can make a big difference in student success and student affordability here. And finally, advocate and educate. This stuff, scholarly communication, it's I think for most people, it's not a real fascinating topic. It's almost a utility. Like, yeah, my office is relatively warm in the winter and relatively cool in the summer, and I get electricity and I get heat and I get access to journals. And now all of a sudden, a lot of people are finding that they don't have access to journals, and it's tough. It's frustrating. It's frustrating for librarians, and I know it's a lot tougher for faculty members who are not able to get to the research they need for their grants, for your research right away. But we're going to have to change something before things get better. So hopefully something I said today kind of stuck with you, and yeah, advocate, educate. Let's all be a part of moving our scholarly communication system to something more just. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Ben, for that informative and provocative presentation. And I'm especially interested in your suggestions about advocating and educating. And I hope that some of our faculty and administrators in the audience today will take that to heed. We have about 10 minutes remaining, and would love to have some questions or comments from the audience if anybody would like to respond. You could go ahead and put a question in chat, or you could just turn your camera on and give a wave and ask away. Maybe I'll throw a question back at one of our audience members. Sarah Nelson had put a comment earlier about the issue that she signed an open access author agreement with a journal and then discovered to her chagrin that the journal is hybrid. Sarah, do you want to just talk a little bit more about that experience and how and when you discovered that you would not be eligible for help from the Open Access Publishing Fund?
Sure. It was totally my fault. I looked at the information on the web about the publishing fund before I went ahead and signed my agreement, but I should have actually sent my question to Jalissa Doney before I signed the agreement to find out that there was that key difference between all fully open access and hybrid journals. So, so a painful lesson, but I still want my article to be open access. So it's a difficult quandary. It caused a mini scène de ménage at my house after I told my partner what had happened. But
Ben, any response to Sarah's dilemma?
Sorry, Sarah. No, it's I do apologize, and that's where this things can get pretty complicated. The reason the Open Access Publishing Fund doesn't support hybrid journals is because the hybrid journals, it's not considered to be, I mean, it's good. It's better to have that open access than not. But it's also, most people don't go looking across journals that are locked behind a paywall kind of hoping that one of those might happen to be open access. So in terms of like actually making the most impact with our funds, that's a decision that was made to prioritize just the fully open access journals. And I will say that just today I got notification that our the $50,000 that we had allocated for just this year has already run out. So there's great demand for that. But yeah, $3,000 is an expensive lesson. I'm very sorry to hear that, Sarah.
Thanks.
We have a question in chat from Rajal, who is asking, is the U of I going to attempt one of these transformative agreements? And she's also interested in hearing more about the Think Open Fellowship.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. In terms of the Think Open Fellowship, I will, I'll have our, one of our people get in touch with you about that. Or maybe I'll just send you an email after this, Rajal. You can find it online by just typing in Think Open U Idaho, but I'll send that to you. So those are really great fellowships. You get to be part of a cohort and develop open access material. And so as for your transformative agreements question, that's a really good one. And this actually just recently came up. We had one agreement from, oh gosh, I'm gonna totally blank. Oh, thank you, Kristen, in the chat. Some information on Think Open there. I'm gonna blank is some biology thing, but we just actually signed on to a transformative agreement that we were going to pay for it anyway. No additional cost to us, but it helps to transition that journal. So to us, that was a really good deal. Like, okay, they're changing their model. They're prioritizing open access. We're not paying anymore. We're going to pay for this anyway. Fantastic. That's a good example of a transformative agreement. Another example,
So that was just for one journal though?
Or it was a small publisher, I will say. The Company of Biologists, I think. So maybe one of the librarians on here can do that. So, you know,
yeah.
it's
Okay.
sometimes these things are pretty small. Sometimes they're kind of big, contract by contract. Another one for one of our much bigger publishers came to us and they said, hey, we've got this great idea for you. You can have this transformative agreement and you're going to save all this money. All you have to do is pay us 20% more. And we said, yeah, the math didn't work out so well. They were saying that author processing charges were $5,000 a piece. And yeah, it like for them, even if we had that 20% more to spend, that seemed to be pretty clearly more of a cash grab than actually trying to kind of be part of positive change. So we'll be evaluating those agreements as they become available, as they come across. I will say that I don't expect that, you know, that UC Elsevier agreement was very, it was hard fought. I mean, that took them 2 years, and UC has some, I mean, that's a big contract and they've got some serious leverage. And that publisher, Elsevier, has not been really forthcoming with other universities. I don't suspect that anytime soon the University of Idaho will be able to jump into one of those. If for no other reason, just that, you know, it doesn't save us money, it just changes what we're paying for. And that was a contract that it was unsustainably big.
Ben, as somebody who goes back and forth between U of I and WSU libraries, that is when WSU library is open, I'm curious about whether there are existing opportunities for cooperation between the two universities for sharing access to journals, or maybe each one specializing in one or the other particular disciplines, but still providing access to the other. Anything that we can do because of our proximity.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. We're actually part of the Orbis Cascade Alliance. It's a, you know, some of you are probably familiar with this through Summit Borrowing, those books that come up in the catalog, but it's a consortium of 37 academic libraries that includes us, Washington State University, University of Washington, Oregon State, University of Oregon, you know, pretty much every big and many small universities in Washington and Oregon, plus us. We're the only Idaho institution in there. But we do, in addition to the physical resource sharing, we do a lot of joint purchases where when publishers are willing to work with us, we can get a better deal by going in together and saying like, okay, so if 25 of us want to buy this subscription, we'll administer it centrally, make it easier for you, publisher, and get it back to us. Now, so that's worked pretty well. One of those things about this whole electronic environment, though, is that it's very easy for publishers to say, you pay for this content, only members of your university can access this. And if we think you're violating that, we'll just cut off access. And before we got the, you know, the Duo thing, we had a lot of accounts phished. And a lot of times we had just entire platforms that just get shut down because someone would get phished and someone would go in and start batch downloading articles. So the publishers really have a lot of control over access, and they're very careful to make sure that just people in the institution have access to that. Back in the print world, it would have been a bit easier to, and I think there might have been an agreement like this. It's well before my time, but where the different we actually had a combined. I used to use them as a monitor stand. We actually had a combined catalog. So you could say like, oh, Washington State subscribes to Journal of Flooring Chemistry and we don't. So I can just drive over the border, and in a print world, that seemed relatively convenient. Yeah, in terms of electronic access now, we have interlibrary loan system that allows us to share that with other libraries for a licensing charge. And that works pretty well. But yeah, still less than ideal.
I'm not seeing any other questions or comments in the chat, so I will invite the audience to turn on your cameras and join in a virtual round of applause for our speaker today, or to put up the applauding hand in Zoom. It's been a fascinating tour of the economics of scholarly publishing, and we're grateful for your efforts on our behalf as faculty and students. And Ben, I hope that you can revisit the colloquium maybe in a year or so and catch us up and tell us what kind of progress you and your fellow academic librarians have made in breaking the stranglehold of the academic publishers.
Yeah, one year we'll have broken it, don't worry. That's a joke. But yeah, thank you, Ken. I will take you up on that invitation. I love talking about this stuff. I think it's really important. And thank you to everybody who came. Please reach out if you have any questions or thoughts about anything from today's presentation.
And again, next week, our speaker is a visiting scholar, Elizabeth Cullen Dunn, coming to us via Zoom from Indiana University, and speaking about issues of refugees and the labor market. And she is the Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholar. So Tuesday, the 30th at 12:30. So please join us then. Thanks, everybody. Get out and enjoy a little sunshine and fresh air this afternoon. And we'll see you here next week.